Williams are a team that are currently on the up, and they will need to be aiming to get back to winning races in Formula 1 someday in the future. Whether they can or not, who knows. But when was the last time a Williams driver stood on the top step of the podium? Well, cast your minds back to 2012, a year which saw Barack Obama win his second term as US president, a year that saw Taylor Swift enter her red era, a year where almost half of the 2024 F1 grid was still in go-karting, and a year which saw Pastor Maldonado driving for Williams in a season where there were 7 different winners in the first 7 races. The race in question we're looking at here, round 5 in Barcelona. Lewis Hamilton had gone quickest in qualifying, however, after failing to be able to provide enough fuel to provide a sample to the FIA afterwards, he got excluded from qualifying, handing pole position to Pastor Maldonado, who had originally qualified P2. Maldonado, he was known for crashes, but he did have his moments where he was actually quite quick. And this weekend happened to be one of them, as he started the race from pole position ahead of home hero Fernando Alonso, while the 2 Lotuses of Kimi Raikkonen and Romain Grosjean locked out the second row, with Sergio Perez rounding off the top 5 for Sauber. The lights went out and the race got underway, and Maldonado got a good start, but Alonso got a slightly better start and was able to pull alongside him, and as they headed into the first corner, despite Maldonado kind of squeezing him a bit on the run down, but he did leave a car length, Alonso kept it pinned, and into the first 2 corners, it was Fernando Alonso in the Ferrari getting able to get into the lead of the race, much to the delight of the Spanish fans that were crowding the Circuit de Barcelona Catalunya that afternoon. However, while Alonso did get into the lead, he wasn't able to really pull away from Maldonado, who kept with him in the opening laps. The gap got to as big as about 1.5 seconds, but it generally kept around about 1 second or so, the gap between the 2 drivers, give or take a few tenths. As I said, Maldonado had his moments where he could actually be quite quick. But it wasn't that long into the race before the first round of pit stops started happening, and that was heading on to lap 7 with the 2 Red Bull drivers starting to make their pit stops. However, it wouldn't be for a few more laps that we would see the leaders coming in, as at the end of lap 10 on to lap 11, Fernando Alonso made his first pit stop of the Grand Prix. This of course handed the race lead to Pastor Maldonado in the Williams car, but he responded straight away at the end of lap 11, heading into the pits to respond to that undercut from Alonso. However, Alonso did manage to keep the lead, and the gap between them grew out to almost 4 seconds just from Alonso pitting first and having a pretty good outlap. Now, while this would be a safety car free race, it wouldn't be an incident free race, as while Maldonado was contending for the race win up at the front with Fernando Alonso, his teammate Bruno Senna was getting into a few problems with Michael Schumacher further down the field, as on lap 13 Michael Schumacher ran into the back of Senna heading into turn 1, bit of misjudgment from Schumacher in my opinion, but it ended with them both out of the race, and of course, as we all remember, it ended up costing Michael Schumacher pole position at the next race in Monaco, as he was given a 5-place grid penalty for the next race, which was Monaco. But none of that really affected the top 2 as they kept on going, and Maldonado did start to close down the gap to Alonso. The gap was down to 2.3 seconds on lap 18, and then on lap 20 the gap had come down to 1.8 seconds, and on that lap alone Maldonado got the gap down to 1.3 seconds before he then ended up getting blocked by Cartha in the final sector and losing all that time and heading back up to 1.8 behind or so. But he didn't really let that get to him, and he kept the gap coming down by a few tenths to 1.5, and it stabilized a little bit before the second round of pit stop started at the end of lap 24, and this time it was Williams who were blinking first and forcing Ferrari's hand really, and Williams going for the undercut to make the second pit stop, and this would end up working out quite nicely for Pastor Maldonado, as it was a couple of laps before Alonso came into the pit lane. However, during that time, 1, Maldonado was fucking flying, and 2, Alonso got a little bit stuck behind a slower lapped car. But it was the end of lap 26 when the Ferrari finally came into the pit stops for the second time, and when he rejoined, he found himself ending up around 6.8 seconds behind Pastor Maldonado, and that grew by a couple more tenths up to 7.1 seconds. This had worked out absolutely brilliantly for Williams, who hadn't won a race at this point in 8 years. However, they wouldn't have it all so simple, as over the laps, as the laps kept on going down, the gap started to come down. It was 6.7 seconds by lap 34, then by lap 36 it was 6.1, lap 38 it was 5.5, and then by lap 39 the gap was under 5 seconds, and then by lap 41 the gap was down to 3.6. Now, Alonso had pitted a few laps later, of course, at that second pit stop, meaning that he was going to have a bit of an advantage towards the end of the stint in having a couple laps younger tyres than Maldonado did. However, as we approached the third round of pit stops, Maldonado still had a bit of a gap. He still had a small bit of a cushion. It wasn't as big as it once was. However, this is Fernando frickin' Alonso we're talking about. So, you know, you're never gonna get away with an easy win when you're racing against him. It was around the end of lap 41 when the third round of pit stops started for the top two. Maldonado coming into the pit lane for his third stop, but it was not as good as the other stops. It ended up being a 6-second stop due to the left rear being a bit slow going on. However, he did have that bit of a gap. He still had the gap of around about 3.5 seconds or so when he'd gone into the pit lane, meaning that he did have a little bit of a cushion. And in the end, when Alonso came into the pits about 3 laps later at the end of lap 44, he still remained ahead of the Spaniard. The gap was sitting around about 3.5 seconds. However, this is where a slight problem came into things on the road. And by problem, I mean a yet to stop again Kimi Raikkonen in Lotus. A combination that ended up actually being rather quick. But Maldonado at this point ended up being stuck behind Raikkonen for a few laps, which played directly into Alonso's hands and allowed him to be able to close up, kind of a former Ferrari driver Kimi Raikkonen helping out current Ferrari driver Fernando Alonso. And it ended up being lap 47 before Maldonado could finally get past the Lotus into turn 1 and retake the lead of the race. Alonso still had to get past him as well, and the move was a little bit more straightforward for Alonso as he was just able to breeze past him with DRS before we were even close to turn 1 on lap 48. At this point, the gap was sitting around about 2 seconds between the Venezuelan in P1 and the Spaniard sitting in P2, but that quickly came down to around about 1 second by the end of the 49th lap. Now, as I said, you're never going to have an easy time of it when the guy behind you is Fernando Alonso, but Maldonado, he kept his head, he kept it cool, and he managed to keep Alonso behind, and even towards the end of the race, in the closing laps, he managed to pull away from Fernando Alonso, and in the end, he kept the first position and came across the line at the end of the 66th lap to win his first ever race in Formula 1 from Fernando Alonso about 3 seconds or so back from P2, and then Kimi Raikkonen rounding off the podium in P3. As I said, this was Williams' first race win in about 8 years at this point, and in fact that will be the last time they've won a race for quite a while. I mean, we're still waiting for them to win another race. It would also be the first win for a Venezuelan driver in Formula 1, however the celebrations would end up being rather short-lived as the Williams garage ended up going up in smoke a while after the race. There were no fatalities, thankfully, however 31 people were injured. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below as ever. Drop a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you're new around here. Merry Christmas everyone, hope it's a good one for you, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.